in the support and safety of victims. HDC also has both a moral and legal imperative to assist victims of domestic abuse. We are committed to, so as an authority, we are committed to ensuring that all residents affected by domestic abuse are supported in a sympathetic and sensitive manner, and that staff act in a non-judgmental way. The policy that you have in front of you tonight sets out the level of service we aim to provide to victims of domestic abuse. At all times, it is the Council's intentions to increase the housing security and safety of those experiencing domestic abuse, and for the perpetrators to be held accountable for their behaviours. So this policy is intended to collate, formalise and adopt the best practices from across all agencies and will be reviewed every 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. I wish we didn't need policies like this, but I'm grateful for this coming before us this evening. Does anybody have any questions or wish to comment? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you. Yeah, so I really welcome this policy coming forwards. I'm pleased to see a section on multi-agency approach, and I think it's really important as we do work with lots of partners. I think particularly, we've got a number of points of contact when people are facing difficulties in their life, and those, I think, those are particularly apt moments when we want to be really vigilant. So, I don't need to say it, but for the record, I'm really keen that we exploit those opportunities to really support people and proactively find those cases and see what we can do to help them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pitt. Councillor Sanderson.
Chair, as you said, it's extremely unfortunate that people find themselves in this situation, but obviously we nominate people for social affordable housing, and our role in this is very key, isn't it? And extremely stressful for people. I've had casework, I think we probably all have, where people are needing to be rehoused, their families need protecting, etc. So, and I didn't perhaps fully appreciate until I read this document just what our staff do, what's available to them, and they work behind the scenes frequently to prevent this. I know there's some mention, is there, about perpetrator behaviour, which I think is important, because we need to, obviously, people who do that need to address their behaviour, don't they? And we need to prevent it from happening in future. That's obviously something that's extremely difficult to manage, but our staff, I know, will do that very well. I'm aware that the law on this has changed quite a lot recently. There was a case in Hertfordshire where our local coroner, a gentleman called David Hemming, was involved. And basically somebody's behaviour led to their partner taking their own life, and they were held liable for manslaughter. And I think that's a landmark case. So the rules are changing significantly on this. And I think it's very important that we highlight it, but I think it's a really good paper, and I fully support it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson, I think you've heard a number of comments. Would you like to come in and comment?
Just to add to the comments of overview and scrutiny who picked up the issue of multi-agency support. I've spent a long time talking to John Collins this afternoon about this topic and other topics. And of course, HDC, we can't do this without multi-agency support, including from our social housing providers as well. And also a good question from Councillor Hunt about training, because it's no use having a policy if we don't make sure that we live it. And so there is training plan to make sure that all officers and all councillors are aware of this policy and are able to enact it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. Then the recommendation then before us tonight is to approve the supporting residents and domestic abuse policy. Can I have a show of hands in favour, please? So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. In which case, our next item, which is item 4, which is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund update. Councillor Wakeford, we've missed your updates, and welcome, because I think this is coming from you this evening. Is that correct? Or are you looking somewhat surprised? Have I got that right?
No, you have that absolutely right, Chair. You do have me, and initially, at least for a change, I won't be talking about market towns, though that comes next. So item 4 is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund update, as you've rightly said, Chair. This is bringing a report back after a year or so on these funding streams on work and spending that is in process for a multi-year period. So it's an update because we said we would keep the council posted, and so that's what we're we're doing. A lot of the work in here is, as I say, still in process. But just for a bit of context, this is part of so-called levelling up. So I reminded scrutiny and would say again here at Cabinet, let's not talk about the B word, but this is the replacement to EU structural funds post Brexit, albeit on a smaller scale. So we've got about 1.6 million of the shared prosperity monies, as well as contribution to county-wide elements, and nearly 1 million on the rural prosperity element as well. That's a slightly different funding stream that came through a bit later, which explains some of the greater progression on the SPF rather than the RPF elements reported on in the report. These are wide-ranging, meeting a range of different objectives from within the so-called pillars from within the Shared Prosperity Fund, and rural objectives around businesses and communities in rural areas. There was a discussion about various specifics at scrutiny. The panel often hears from me anyway, and it was me flying solo as it happened a couple of weeks ago. So apologies again to scrutiny colleagues for that, but they tolerated. But if we turn to the specific section in the report on comments from scrutiny, if I can find them, in section 3, page 29-30 of our pack. We had opportunity just to touch on a couple of these specifics. So I had opportunity to clarify that the scoping of active travel routes wasn't about delivering active travel routes within a certain time frame. The money, quantum of money is not remotely up to that, but it's around scoping some routes so that we're in a position to jump as and when funding becomes available, which is preparing to make use of available funding pots is a sort of core part of our work across the couple of items I'm presenting on this evening. But I was able to reassure members that we have already and will continue to involve input from members across the district, especially in rural areas, about the identification of routes that we'd scope out. I had opportunity to remind members as to the Huntingdon Business Accelerator announcements. There was a question around how we'd advertise that. That's been in a couple of all-member bulletins, and we've emailed out the press release, but we are recirculating that as well, because members are warmly encouraged, if they've got businesses in their local areas who might be interested in the Accelerator programme, to apply for that. We sort of returned to the ongoing discussions we've had with respect to different areas of grant funding about whether we are managing risk relating to the relatively meagre staffing that we're allowed to fund with external grants. There is a general issue in the way government prefers to fund sort of stuff happening rather than the ongoing mechanics of a council administration. But I reassured members at scrutiny, I'd reassure Cabinet colleagues tonight as well, that we are content that we have the resource we need to manage the programme, though of course it is run tightly to maximise the money that we're able to deliver out into our communities. The electric vehicle charging scheme, for which the money's been put forward to support the development of a policy, came up. I'm conscious Councillor Davenport-Ray is around the table this evening and has presented in more detail on that recently. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, so I'm looking now at 3.3, having jumped around in section 3 of our report. Councillor Jennings picked up a challenge around what success means with respect to a lot of these projects, and that is absolutely the sort of question that we have been asking ourselves and have asked in this forum previously as well, because we've got targeted metrics, but with respect to each funding line, but we are already working on how to, I suppose, encapsulate value of spend on these sorts of potentially disparate but cumulatively valuable projects. And so there is a work in progress around how we articulate that. So I thanked Councillor Jennings for raising a good question to which I didn't have an easy answer, and I don't think any of us do. But I committed that we were further elaborating that, and would continue to do so as we report further with respect to the SPF. I will pause there, I think, Chair, if I may, but happy to take further comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford, and it's always good when our scrutiny colleagues genuinely do challenge us, and obviously it's good also when we are also in the same headspace around how do we continually learn and continually improve. Does anybody have any comments? Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you, Chair. It was actually, I'm going to carry on from Councillor Jennings' comments. It has always not worried me, but it's a thing that goes through my head when we're spending money, obviously government money, but it's still, money. It could well be public money for all we know. How do we know that this, how are we going to evaluate this? And also, do government expect us to evaluate and give back any feedback on the spending of this money?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So the short answer is government require all sorts of forms to be filled in and information to be fed back, and I am mercifully not across the detail of some of the reporting that I know is a non-trivial burden on our already stretched officers. Whether that reporting is as efficient as it might be, or encapsulates value in the way you're getting at, I think is a good challenge of national government as well as us as a district, because there's lots of reporting back. Is that actually about proving value in a way that our residents would recognise? I think is a good question. If government is hypothetically more interested in numbers of things that have happened rather than a broader articulation of value to our communities. But as I alluded to in discussing the scrutiny comments, and I'm happy to elaborate, our officer team have already established an element using our major change project governance structure to focus on exactly these sorts of challenges around how we evaluate and articulate value. That is an ongoing piece of work. It's partly around ensuring that we are challenging projects while spending is still underway in them, rather than just learning lessons each time at the end, actually looking at what lessons we can learn midway to implement for the programmes that are already in train. So, for example, a lot of these are spending over 2 or 3 years. There is scope for iterative learning. So that kind of health check is I think a valuable part of our governance around value. I might leave that one there if I may, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the Green Business Impact Programme element of the UK SPF spending. I'm really happy to see from the report that some of the businesses are now undertaking their net zero plans for their businesses. I think it's a really tricky niche to be able to support both our small businesses locally and on our path to decarbonisation. So I'm wondering, with the businesses that have already gone through part of this process, are we hearing anything back from them on the parts that are most useful to them, or things that we can use to encourage small businesses, even more small businesses, to take part in the project?
Thanks, Councillor Davenport-Ray. I think it's worth underlining as the update references that a significant amount of the activity has upticked only in the last couple of months of this calendar year. So I am sure we are learning in an ongoing way. I think a lot of that is likely to be still to come. I'm not across the detail of the feedback from each individual business that we've supported as part of this line, as I think you'll probably appreciate. But I would be very happy to pick up with officer colleagues who are to kick the tyres that bit more firmly with respect to the learning in the way that you've raised.
Thank you. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's kind of picking up on the point that Councillor Taylor made around sort of establishing value. I think there's I'm no doubt repeating myself from previous conversations about UK SPF, but there's always a tendency to measure the things that are easy to measure. And, you know, there's some good evidence here in the outcomes column talking about jobs created and new businesses supported, which is really great to see. I think there's a bit of I'm not sure if dichotomy is quite the right word, but there's always a risk when we're directly funding things that you kind of almost build in a bit of complacency to say, well, if the council's going to fund something and I didn't get that funding, hopefully they'll fund it next year and I'll wait and all the rest of it. And I think there's a bit of drag on progress that kind of comes from that. And I think where the exceptions lie is in when you've got a public realm improvement and actually we're making a town centre more attractive. And there's a cumulative effect to those sort of interventions that are really exciting, where actually we put the money in a very strategic place and we're not expecting any specific business to benefit from it, but actually lots of businesses can potentially benefit from it, but under their own terms. So I think those are the things that are the hardest to measure, because how many businesses benefit from a public realm improvement, we don't know. Maybe in 10 years we might have a better idea, but we certainly won't know in the immediate future. But actually, I think that's where the most value lies. So while I welcome this, column of outcomes is really great to see, I'm keen that we don't get too sidetracked just focusing on those and actually kind of use our intuition to understand where the real benefit that we can get from this funding may be found.
Thank you. I had no idea you had any interest in public realm improvements, Councillor Pitt. Fascinating. You might be interested in the next agenda item. But I think you clearly make a good point that there are better and worse ways of spending money. And I think it's worth reassuring colleagues that the various priorities that we have identified schemes to spend against within the SPF criteria in particular, which are more developed. Those were not picked out of a hat. Those were picked carefully with those precise concerns in mind around how we ensure that funding is leveraging some wider value and helping, for example, influence the direction of travel in our local economy, helping support the sustainability of that more generally with knock-on impacts. So this is more than just about supporting a certain number of businesses for its own sake. It's about what that represents in terms of the wider impacts. But there are a whole range of ways that we can invest in the capacity of our district, whether residents, whether businesses, whether community groups, or some group. Public realm improvements is one of them, which we'll pick up on the next item. So I think we are live to those concerns and the points you absolutely rightly raised, because we don't want to be feeling good about ourselves simply for having supported X number of businesses, as much as those businesses might appreciate that. But it is precisely, as I volunteered earlier, as picked up with respect to Councillor Taylor as well, it's what that's achieving more broadly for us.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford. Councillor Pitt, and then I'll bring in Mr. Morley.
Thank you. I try to avoid being a stock record about public realm, but actually I think the Vibrant Communities was another really good example where there was a wide benefit, really visible to the public, and I thought it was money well spent. So thank you.
I thought it might also be useful just to come in from an officer perspective, and I think just to give a slightly officer view on the two questions there. So within any program like this, there are obviously two aspects of it. One is the kind of funding criteria of the scheme itself. So when the government launches the scheme, the criteria against which we can bid in the first place. And you might recall at the time the launching of the Levelling Up white paper and the 12 missions that contained. So at that time, the criteria of the scheme was very much linked to those objectives within the Levelling Up plan, and a huge amount of work went in to making sure we fulfilled the terms of the kind of the grants that we could in the way that was most impactful for Huntingdonshire as a whole. I thought that was a useful point just to draw us back to. But exactly as Councillor Wakeford said, there is really stringent internal controls to make sure we have the kind of impact that Councillor Taylor's talking about. So firstly, at a board level across all of these, where we're looking to make sure that the outcomes desired are delivered. But Mr Gildersleeves and myself sat at the Major Change Board that Councillor Wakeford reflected on today to review their work and to make sure we are getting the best possible impact we can from this external funding for the residents of Huntingdonshire. So there is very, very strong guidance, and that clear appetite that's been expressed around the room is very much driven through the officer space as well.
Thank you. I think it's always remembering the context, because some of these programmes are programmes that are of their time. And I think that's something that's always important to remember, because sometimes I think the important thing is we learn as we deliver a particular initiative, particularly where it's a government initiative. And there are things that I think we all reflect on and think, well, if we had our time again with that particular initiative and actually we had different criteria we could use, we might do something different again. And I think that's always our opportunity, because the next pot of money that becomes available may be something else that we think would benefit Huntingdonshire, and that we will use the experience of this piece of work to inform the thinking on what we might want to do next. And I think always remembering how we can measure impact is always one of those challenges. And there are people who spend a lot of their time working very hard to make sure we're measuring the right things and can demonstrate it's doing everything we aspire for. So I commend officers for their good work on this, but I think all of us perhaps would be even more ambitious if we had our time again, just by what we're learning. Councillor Wakeford?
No, absolutely. And as you rightly say, Chair, we want to be in a position where, as future funding pots come along, we can show what we have learnt from what we're spending and how we can better utilise that. If there aren't other questions or comments, I wonder if I might leave colleagues with a bit of positive news with respect to the final item in the rural Prosperity Fund elements, so the Capital Grants Rural Business Programme. As people may or may not have seen in the last few hours, we have formally launched that. In the last 24 hours, I think we've emailed a press release out this afternoon. As I indicated earlier, the rural fund elements, the money has come through a bit later, but we are working to progress that at pace. So that's now live. The target is 10 new jobs and 2 farm diversification projects. But again, I'd reassure Councillor Pitt it's what that represents more broadly, rather than a ceiling on our ambition. But I'd urge colleagues to draw the attention of any potential interested groups in their areas to the availability of that funding pot as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford. And good news is always welcome. And I know a lot of us have been really quite keen to see that reach the public domain. So that's wonderful. Councillors, then before you have this item is to note, unless there are any more questions that I've missed or comments, then I think we will move to the next item. Thank you very much. Councillor Wakeford, this is you again. I apologise, you are rather agenda heavy this evening because we are back to our Market Towns programme spring update. Where did the last update go? How did we get to spring quite so quickly?
Thank you. Yeah, well, there's not very much going on in the Market Towns programme team office at the moment. No, it has been a busy quarter, to state the blindingly obvious. To pick up the report in vaguely reverse order, if I may, just to vary the order and sequence of addressing our market towns. The report touches on the Broadway improvements in St Ives, for which design's being finalised. There's sort of some ongoing back and forths as to the specific design that are alluded to in the report, but that's making progress. It's fundamentally being led by county colleagues, but we've been able to release some funding to unlock a larger pot of money that they had available, so we're getting particularly good value there. In Huntingdon, the Cromwell Museum has identified a nearby property now to seek to acquire, to expand into. That's not going to provide the quantum of resource necessary to then fully kit that out as further museum space, but it would give a physical space to support future bids by the Cromwell Museum to do that. And in Ramsey, we've commissioned concept designs for the Great White projects, and we're in the process of presenting feasibility studies to the town council to ensure their ongoing input and iterative improvement there. Shopfront grants are now live across all of our market towns. Unfortunately, as I had to note at scrutiny as well, not outside market towns because of the nature of the funding pots we've got here, but we are on the lookout for ways of delivering something similar in, for example, service centres beyond our market towns as well. So it's not for lack of interest, but that's a function of the strings attached to the monies, and various other items listed in the report. But why don't I move on to St Neots? So there is an awful lot that has happened since the last quarterly report. We've got the main works commenced and well underway now in the Market Square. We've worked on most of the Market Square surface by now. Members will be aware, particularly members from St Neots, that we've had more than a few conversations around the hoardings. Unfortunately, precisely because we're trying to ensure that the Market Square remains usable through the period of the works, we've got hoardings that are able to be moved around, so we haven't been able to dig in permanent, nice wooden, maybe painted with a bit of perspex glass hoardings of a sort that we could have done had we written off the use of the Market Square for a year. But that work is progressing as well as it might be. But I warned scrutiny, and I will warn Cabinet colleagues that just because we haven't had meaningful delays yet doesn't mean we inevitably won't at some point. There will be challenges. It's a major construction project. It would be extraordinary if there weren't. We have signed a development agreement with the owner of the Old Falcon. Colleagues are aware already, but is formally reported upon into the public space here in the report. And we're close to submitting a planning application that I am hopeful better befits the heritage value of the site, certainly than anything we've seen previously, and frankly goes as far as is economically viable for us to do so. I'm looking forward to us bringing that into the public domain in the next couple of months. And we've submitted a planning application for the redevelopment of the Priory Centre as well. Colleagues around the table are involved in different ways in that project. I can elaborate if helpful, but possibly that's in light of what detail I went into at scrutiny, possibly isn't called for, but let me know if you feel otherwise, colleagues. And some of the smaller elements linked to the future High Streets works in St Neots as well have moved on as well. So we've appointed an artist for the public art project. We've appointed a designer for the stage that we're adding to the Market Square to maximise its use as a community space and as that sort of central focal point in a community that Councillor Pitt talked about the value of in our previous item. So I think I'll stop there, but not because there isn't more that the Market Towns team have done that I could spend the evening talking to you about, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford. And I think a particular highlight for me is the Old Falcon coming forward. And I'm really pleased to hear that particular update, given it's been a conversation around this table for a long time. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. It's also been a conversation in St Neots for a long time. It's been a huge, intractable problem. We haven't quite solved it yet, have we? But we're taking a massive step forward to bringing that building back into public use. And all of the feedback, well, most of the feedback, overwhelmingly most of the feedback that I've had from residents is very positive and excited about that progress. And I think, it's the whole of this Market Town programme obviously involves some disruption. Obviously, we've done some of the dirty digging bits up front. But I think now that we're starting to get some good news, there's lots of exciting things happening in St Neots. So this progress of the Falcon is one of them, but also kind of slightly outside the scope of the project. But the HDC has also announced the resurfacing of the Riverside Park paths this week, and also with the Town Council building a Changing Places toilet in Riverside Park as well. So, it's always been a complaint of St Neots residents that we don't get enough funding, but I think there's lots of funding going into St Neots, and we're starting to see the benefits now. So congratulations to you and to the team for finally moving the Old Falcon project forward.
Thank you. I'm very happy to take the credit for resurfacing paths in Riverside Park and Changing Places toilets as well. But Councillor Taylor might have words with me later. But yes, good works happen in St Neots, both under the auspices and beyond the auspices of the Market Towns programme. I completely agree with that sentiment, Councillor Ferguson, and as you've rightly underlined, it is not possible to do any redevelopment of this scale without a more than minor element of disruption, and we are grateful for residents and businesses bearing with us. There is a longer-term value, again, as we've discussed, in a previous item already this evening. And I think the positivity around the Old Falcon is it's certainly palpable. As you say, we are bringing an update into the public domain now because we have been working very carefully and sensitively behind the scenes to try and get to the point where we are able to do this, because it has felt intractable to successive administrations, and we are not out of the woods yet. I'm not sure we're even in the woods, but we've got a nice plan of the woods that we're shortly publishing, and I was able to reassure members at Scrutiny, I'd reassure Cabinet colleagues, we'll be seeking public consultation on in the normal way as planning applications always would, but this one might get that little bit more interest than another planning application from St Neots, and we are working up a plan to facilitate that level of interest and engagement on the consultation proposals.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Councillor Sanderson.
Brilliant. That's fine, thank you. No, I'm really pleased to see this as somebody who visits St Neots quite often, and really the jewel in the crown here is the Old Falcon, isn't it? It's just been that way for so many years, distracts from the sort of pleasant atmosphere in such a vibrant town. So well done to yourself and the team, Councillor Wakeford, on achieving this. And I'm pleased the date's been announced for improving those footpaths on the Riverside car park, because that's actually a question I was asked at Scrutiny when I introduced the Sill paper, which I'll be doing next. So Councillor Jennings asked me that, so I'm pleased there's an update there. What impresses me, though, is the amount of joined up working here. Sort of thinking ahead. I mean, I've seen a mention of using some of the materials from the Market Square when the project to improve the Priory Centre comes around. Excellent idea. The site for the splash park being used so contractors can store their materials so they can keep the Market Square clear for market, which is what it's there for, among other things. So really good sort of forward planning here, and great news for people in St Neots and those of us who like to visit. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Pitt.
I am now. Hello. Okay. I just want to touch on, because we seem to be talking about St Neots a lot. I think, and going back to Councillor Sanderson's thoughts of partnership working, I would like to say congratulations to Huntingdon Town Council and the museum, etc., because they are working together as well and have identified a property location. So that is good news for Huntingdon. I will touch on St Neots a little bit, and I might be a little bit negative as well, because I did receive a email from a resident regarding the timescale, and they were concerned because they had heard that we were not on time with the Market Square, etc. Buildings. But just wondered if Councillor Waitford could touch on that, and I would be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm very happy to reassure Councillor Taylor, as I updated scrutiny, and I've mentioned this evening, as of whenever your email was sent, and as of now, we haven't had delays reported by our contractor. We've done an element of resequencing in terms of the ordering of works. We'll be continuing to do that to get ahead of potential delays to prevent them arising. I can't speak for gossip in certain quarters of St Neots, but I think it's worth underlining that we are acutely focused on the timing. I mentioned at scrutiny that while we are planning a full year of works on the Market Square, we are aiming to do that faster. I was written up in parts of the press as council aiming to beat Christmas, which upon reading the story was of the positive variety. We are not able to confirm that we're able to do that, but we are setting ourselves ambitious targets because it would be the icing on the cake if we could have Christmas light switch-ons on a new Market Square. But that is, as I say, beyond the project plan. But it's worth, as I say, having an incentive. So yeah, we are aiming to be earlier, not later. Councillor Taylor, may I, while I have the mic, just touch on Councillor Sanderson, a couple of comments he made. I mean, I am really pleased with the progress we're making, but as we've already said this evening, we have not achieved anything yet with respect to the Old Falcon in any tangible sense that a resident standing on the Market Square or on a bit of the Market Square they can access around the development works looking at the Old Falcon would recognise. So we are certainly cognizant of that, and I'm grateful for his thanks. But of course, it's the joint working, as he rightly referenced, with different stakeholders. Particularly grateful to the involvement of the Town Council across the strands of the Future High Streets projects in St Neots. But also we've got, particularly with respect to the Priory Centre, a very effective cross-party working group, multi-stakeholders, which does pick up representation across the chamber here in the district. And I think that working relationship we've got is enormously beneficial. I won't purport to speak for opposition colleagues while they're not here this evening, but I think that's warmly, certainly it's warmly perceived from our side, and I think it's valued. So I'm grateful to stakeholders across the board, because this is a couple of years worth of work we've had as our administration, of course building on a legacy of some of the funding having been identified, if not specifics for spending worked through before we took over. So this is a sort of a good news story for the communities generally, rather than for any one administration.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's always a risk leaving it late to hold my hand up, and I'm kind of just going to repeat a few things that have been said. But I just want to great news about Cromwell Museum. I saw on my news feed in the last 12 hours, Huntingdon's Oliver Cromwell Museum soars in popularity, had their busiest year in terms of footfall for 25 years. So it seems like an apt time to be moving to bigger premises. So that's really good to see. On St Neots, I think absolutely, it's already been said, but I totally welcome the collaborative approach that this council has undertaken. I think it's absolutely vital for such a big suite of projects with so many tendrils in all sorts of places throughout the community. And I think, when there are lots of challenges, as with any kind of infrastructure project, but I really feel like we're leaning into those challenges and heading in a really good direction. So thanks to the team. And I'm looking forward to, hopefully, not too long, we'll actually see the fruits of our labour appearing and being really used, and I suspect loved. I think one other thing regarding the Falcon, absolutely wonderful, we've got progress. I think there's still a bit of expectation from the public that we've bought the building and we're going to throw another 7 or 8 figure sum into doing something extraordinary with it. I think we need to keep reinforcing that message that it still is in private ownership, and we're taking a facilitative role. But most of the people I speak to in St Neots who mention the Falcon regularly, the message is, can we just do something with it? And I think we are now doing something with it. So I'm delighted that we're, achieving that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are about the Great White projects in Ramsey. The report outlines the 1.7 million that has been set aside for Ramsey, and that the feasibility studies were presented to the Town Council in March, and that the next step is public consultation. I'm curious, what was the feedback from the Town Council? What do they think of the feasibility studies? And when can residents in Ramsey expect for the consultation to begin?
Thank you, Councillor Davenport-Ray. As I was able to reassure scrutiny members and the scrutiny member in particular from Ramsey Town Council frantically checking his diary for a meeting he might have missed, Councillor Corney, I apologised to him on the evening that, of course, the hazard of drafting reports on the timescales we do is that March meeting was planned but was then rescheduled. So he hadn't missed it. But that dialogue is very much underway with the Town Council. I arrived back on a flight at 5 o'clock this morning with children from Easter holiday before school tomorrow, so I haven't caught up with the team as to the specific feedback from the most recent conversation they've had. As yet, I've had the day job in between, but I am really excited by the scope to make some progress on a few different objectives in Ramsey as well. I think the opportunity to think more holistically around the better use of space with the Muse Close car park that's there, linked to an element of pedestrianisation on the Broadway, which might cost car parking spaces. So making sure that we're more efficiently using space elsewhere, which has been a matter that Ramsey councillors have been raising, I think, with successive iterations of HDC administration. That is in earlier days. I can't give you specifics around formal public consultation because we're not at that stage quite yet. This is at an earlier stage than the St Neots works, of course, because the money has come through more recently. We secured this in our time as an administration, so there's a good deal of road ahead of us, but I am optimistic that we will engender that same level of pride in Ramsey that we've heard from around the cabinet table from St Neots members with respect to the investments in St Neots, even if the quantum of funding is not quite of the same scale. But we're
Thank you,
still
Councillor
looking for
Wade.
pots.
Well, I'm sure our market towns will be pleased to hear that, because I know that there is a great appetite, and you've already touched on the fact that some of our bigger settlements that are not our market towns are also looking somewhat enviously and rather hoping that you will find some additional money from some pot somewhere from government so that they can also benefit from some of this. We've talked quite significantly about the items tonight. I hope that those watching and listening will recognise our excitement at seeing these projects coming through, and it's really good to see something happening in each of our market towns. Unless there's any more questions or comments, this item is to note, but please would you take our thanks back to the team. It is no small understatement to say it's been a little bit busy this last quarter, but I'm really pleased because some things take a long time to come through to fruition. But if the public knew how much work was going on behind the scenes, they'd know that there isn't a day that goes by where there isn't somebody beavering away, making that project move forward a step at a time. So thank you very much to the team that worked very hard to deliver this for us. Councillor Wakefield, you'll be pleased to know that you get a stay of execution because we're going to move on to the SIL item agenda. So you don't need to present this next item, although I appreciate we will be picking up items that are particularly relevant to you. For those who are watching, item 6 is the SIL infrastructure levy funding allocation. We're going to do something a little unusual tonight in the sense that we're going to take each of the recommendations once Councillor Sanderson has presented his report, and we're going to work our way through them. I know there will be a great deal of interest from those who are watching and listening and have got interests in their particular locations. We are going to vary the order simply because we've had declarations of interest in the room. So we're going to take them all in the order they appear on the paper, with the exception that we're going to take the St Neots one from last, the fire station, and we'll take the George V Pavilion at the very last one, because that way, Councillor Sanderson, as a portfolio holder, you can stay for all of the debate bar the item that you've got an interest in, and that should, I hope, make it flow fairly straightforwardly. I'm expecting quite a long conversation about these items because I know they are of significant interest to people. So without further ado, Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much, Chair. So our latest funding round for SIL was launched on the 27th of November 2023, closing date of 22nd of January this year. So all bids received within that SIL funding towards infrastructure projects, they've been assessed by our officers, and obviously the recommendations are before you in the report, which we'll probably delve into a bit more deeply shortly. So of course the outcomes of this round, that doesn't preclude applicants who are unsuccessful from submitting future applications to future rounds, and they'll be considered against the adopted criteria at the time of the determination. And as all members will be aware, there's a review of SIL governance currently underway, and we'll get some further information on that to Cabinet during the summer, this summer, and then look at adopting a communication strategy, but that's for the future. So as you say, we have a number of recommendations in front of us, but just before I get to that, just to run through some sort of basics on SIL. To date, we've allocated funding to 52 projects throughout the district, and that totals just under £27.5 million. But the total cost of that project, so with joint funding, that's actually 102 million. So that's got us basically a lot more for our contributions, which is very good. And of course, unlocking growth and increasing or improving our infrastructure is a key part of what we do. And under the current governance arrangements, Cabinet can consider applications for SIL funding over £50,000. Those SIL funding elements of up to £50,000, they were approved in line with delegated authority, and they're detailed for information at Appendix 2. And just whizzing ahead, if I may, to the comments from scrutiny. Sorry, I'll just get to those. They're way down here somewhere. Sorry, there's quite a lot of text here. I need to get to the bottom. Sorry, 5.1. So scrutiny considered this on the 3rd of April. Fair to say, quite an interesting scrutiny panel that evening. Councillor Corney, Steve Corney from Ramsey, asked why so many applications have been unsuccessful in this round, and there are a number of unsuccessful ones, as you can see. And obviously, I have some sympathy with applicants who are unsuccessful, because I know that they're trying genuinely to try and find improvements for their local communities, and we all want to do that. I think it's key that they show the need for growth within that community. Parishes perhaps don't always bring that forward, And sometimes, in fact, there isn't enough growth. I think you'll see with Folkesworth, for example, very worthy project, but they haven't had perhaps that growth element to back up their bid. Another observation from Councillor Corney was just when they submit applications, and this is, I think, something we need to look at, just making sure that applicants know where their bid's been received and they get a confirmation on time. I think even something like redesigning the forms and the format will help, but that's something for a future stage. Councillor Slade raised the issue about the St Neots fire station. As you'll see, they were asking for a very high contribution towards that project. But I am pleased at 5.6, Councillor Jennings asked about delays to footpath improvements at the riverside. As we heard earlier, that's now been programmed in. I think the problem there was simply that the heavy rain caused a lot of wet surfacing, which didn't allow that to go ahead. And obviously, we didn't have, I don't think, the opportunity to go through each one individually. I think scrutiny felt they wanted to give more of an overview, which I think was very interesting. We do have about £33 million in the pot facility, if you like, but obviously there will be great demands on that. East West Railway, for example, a lot of strategic infrastructure projects, so not necessarily the more local ones, and that will eat into that resource. Of course, we are getting a lot more bigger sites coming forward, a lot more development management committee. On Monday, we have 2 big strategic sites, not very far from Huntingdon, for example. As you'll see at 8.1, it just details that East West Rail A428, A141, number of transport strategies coming forward. So that part may look healthy, but there will be some further demands on that. Just going through some of the applications in particular. I think I mentioned Folkesworth earlier. If we look at, for example, Magpass, based at Acklenbury Weald, they did actually have an allocation under the last round for about £700,000. Unfortunately for them, they weren't successful on this occasion. Some interesting ones, for example, Colne have put in a bid for a footpath. I would normally think that's a local highways initiative through the county council. I can see where they were coming from on that, but again, I don't think that we felt that looked closely enough and unlocked growth or the potential for growth, which of course is what this is all about. And if I can, there's another one which I just wanted to highlight as well a bit further down. Sorry, I'm flipping between pages. So a successful one was the community centre extension at Ramsey. And they have 39% ask there. We're funding them to the tune of £100,000. A lot of very good work going on there. I think they put in an excellent application, and clearly they're having growth in Ramsey, and that will help. The extension of the community centre will help to mitigate the impacts of that. So I'm happy to take questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Can I ask a question just before we move into perhaps some of the more detail, because I suspect we will want to talk about each of the applications. Am I right that we brought this round forward because we wanted to try and see if we could help anybody towards any applications at this stage? And just remind me how we make these assessments. I presume it's on the paperwork that we receive. So if you might just explain that just for clarity before we move into the detail, please.
Yeah, so as you said, Chair, we're doing a lot of consultation work, a lot of analysis on a new seal governance arrangement. I think all members feel that it's out of date, needs to be improved. And we discovered during this round, of course, there were some gaps in the governance, perhaps, and that didn't make it easy for applicants. So the idea was to have one final round, just a year more or less since we did the last one. So 2 successful applicants here, Ramsey and Sawtry. So that's obviously been of benefit to them quite considerably. And you're right, you can obviously, as with a planning application, you can only really look at what's in front of you. It's the old question, isn't it? Answer the question on the exam paper, not the one you wish had been asked. And I think on some occasions, perhaps applicants have strayed into territory that wasn't entirely relevant, and they've perhaps omitted things that would have been more helpful. I think that's something we need to pick up on, just some of those more practical steps as we go through the governance review, and I hope that will be a more flexible system and will help some of those that perhaps missed out this time.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. So are colleagues happy to move into discussing individual items, or do people have any more general comments or questions at this stage? Councillor Pitt?
Just on the price, I think Councillor Sanderson may have misspoke, but we haven't yet decided on those items. So, I think future tense would have been appropriate there, but I'm sure it just misspoke.
Yes, so for clarity, we have some recommendations in front of us, including some that is a recommendation to decline and some which is a recommendation to approve. So we need to go through that process to ratify those recommendations or to disagree if we feel there is sufficient evidence to do so. Can we take them then in order? So as I said, we will defer both the St Neots Fire Station and the George V to the end of the order. So if we start then with B, which is the Hilton Pavilion, who'd like to kick us off on walking us through the Hilton Pavilion, the recommendation to decline? Councillor Sanderson, would you like to just sort of remind us why that recommendation is a decline?
Yeah, sorry, that was probably use of the royal we there rather than the actual. It's a recommendation, of course. It's still for Cabinet to make that decision, quite accurately pointed out by Councillor Pitt there. So, again, this is renovation of a cricket pavilion. Quite a high percentage ask here, 88%. This is for maintenance at Hilton Pavilion. Felt there's not enough supporting evidence here to show why the project is a local priority. Limited growth again in this area. I think it's 1.5%, as it says in the report, and no evidence that the community are behind it, beyond non-councillor members of the committee. So that was reason for another suggestion for decline here. I think given the limited growth here, and perhaps that lack of evidence of local support, it was felt that it wasn't suitable for still strategic funding. So the recommendation there is to decline.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Does anybody have any comments on that particular one? Councillor Pitt and then Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I mean, I think we may end up making sort of broadly similar points to a number of these applications, but I mean, fundamentally, there needs to be a separation between is something fundamentally a good idea and is presented as a potentially a good idea. But I think for me, community support for a project is really key. So, I mean, I've sat on town council meetings where we all agree that we're right about something, but without that kind of wider evidence base, it's really hard to demonstrate it to a third party, and us being, that third party in this circumstance. So we're not saying there isn't community support, but if the evidence hasn't been presented as part of the application, it's very hard to come to an alternative conclusion, unfortunately.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Councillor Taylor.
I was going to say exactly the same. So I think, in the broader sense, a lot of them lacks the evidence of the community involvement or support. So, I was going to say exactly the same as Councillor Pitt.
Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. It probably doesn't hurt to underline again, as we've touched on, that as part of the process here, we've had recommendations from our officer team, not from the administration as councillors, which is what's in front of us as to whether or not it's appropriate to approve the spend. But like Councillor Pitt and Councillor Taylor, I think it is difficult to fault the officer advice to us here. I certainly don't see any compelling reasons to be justifying seeking to depart from that really clear advice with respect to this item, Chair. And Councillor Pitt's right. We may well say some slightly similar things with respect to a few of the items here tonight.
Thank you,
I'm comfortable with the recommendation on B.
Thank you. So unless there are any other comments then, can we take a vote on that one? Because that way then we'll work our way through the list. I know that's somewhat unconventional because sometimes we take things on block, but I think it will be much more straightforward. So we have a recommendation from officers to decline the Hilton Pavilion. Can I have a show of hands of all those in favour of declining that funding? Thank you, that's unanimous. That then moves us on to C, which is a recommendation to approve the funding for a Sawtry Pavilion. Councillor Sanderson?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a 20% ask here, basically, asking for £66,000, total cost of 330. And I think where this shows where it works, I mean, clearly you can see that they're having 22% growth here, which is quite high. So, of course, they will need those community facilities. And currently extending the social area, that include a new kitchen, installing economy heating, as it currently has no heating, and helping to renovate the changing rooms. They have the advantage here of some 106 funding because, of course, they've had the growth, so that will partly come with it. And that's associated with the planning permission that you can see there, the reference 20/1407, which is outline. And I think given the high growth here, the match funding that they've obtained, it's considered here the project's suitable for SIL funding at this time. There is a couple of caveats here. So the recommendation is to approve subject to funding being repaid upon receipt of the 106 funds. So actually they will be paying some of that back. Just need to clarify where that is going to, whether it's going to the parish council. Just confirmation that the works are permissible under the Elizabeth II Trust, which is slightly different from a King George V Trust. Clarity on the funding amount and the cost of the project, hopefully excluding VAT. But I think I'm happy that we consider those caveats and recommend approval subject to that.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Have I got any comments on this? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
I actually have a question. Maybe I'll ask Mr. Gildersleeves the question. So on this application, the report explains that it's the second application for this scheme, that they were awarded something in the past, but then withdrew that and now made this application. I'm unclear on that point. Could you clarify that point?
Through yourself, Chair. I can only go on what's in the report there, that the previous submission was withdrawn due to the applicants finding an alternative solution. So that's not to say that we would have reached the same conclusion or a different conclusion on the previous application, because we never got the chance to make it. So all I can say is this application that's before us now, based on the details we've presented, is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as set out.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson.
Just to add, Chair, as well, this has the advantage of being recognised in the infrastructure development plan. So it's actually a named project in there. So it's clearly something that we realised needed to be done.
Thank you. And is there any other comments on this particular item? Then Councillor Wakeford.
No, I think someone doesn't want to hear my comment. They will only be brief anyway. No, I think this is a really strong application, as colleagues have flagged. I think finding a way of delivering something similar for less money is clearly very welcome as well, compared to the previous award referenced. The contribution element is small. The fact that we've got the clearly demonstrated need, there is ongoing housing growth in Sawtrey. I think it's pretty clear cut for me, Chair. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Then, if there are no other comments on that one, can we move to a vote? So the recommendation before you is to approve. Can I have a show of hands for approval? Thank you. So unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on then to Berry. Thank
you, Chair. Quite a high ask here, asking for 2.3 million out of just over 2.6. So that's about 88% according to my maths. So again, I think the difficulty here is it's not been named in the neighbourhood plan for Berry, which is unfortunate because I know they work quite hard on that. No confirmation that the building is owned by the parish. Clearly, it's not owned by the parish council. It doesn't have the benefit of planning permission. And it, again, it hasn't been mentioned in any planning applications or 106 discussions. And that, of course, as we know, is a good way of unlocking funding, which I think may have helped with this. There was some consultation here, but it does seem to be quite low. Only 79 residents' views were really included, and an event of 131 residents. So again, probably falls down on that slightly, and also the lack of growth in that area, and considered not suitable at this time for SIL funding.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. I'm the Chair. Can't get my words out today. I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and say this is one that I'm personally a little disappointed, because if RAF Upward does come forward, this is quite a landmark building, and I'm aware it's not in use. It's derelict, and I think has suffered vandalism. This is one that I look at and think, I think perhaps it's just not the right time. In other words, we don't yet have planning consent on that site, but I'm very much hoping that perhaps there is some lessons to be learnt from this, because it is the sort of thing I would like to see come forward in time. But I'll certainly take comments. I think Councillor Davenport-Ray, you were going to come in.
I think the report points out just how much growth there is in this area, which makes me slightly surprised that this type of community centre isn't something that was considered as a Section 106 project, because that's exactly the reason behind Section 106 projects. I'm a little bit concerned about elements of the project that could at later times be used by commercial operators. And in terms of spending our public money on a building that might be used in that way, that makes me uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm very conflicted on this one. The area has definitely had growth. But I think this might be something that in our next infrastructure delivery plan, this is the kind of thing that I hope that they would put forward, but I don't think it's fitting the right requirements for SIL.
Councillor Pitt?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. So I think picking up on the potential for sort of commercial use, I mean, a lot of community buildings will be the workplace for small business owners. You know, they'll hire a room for a few hours and run an exercise class and so on and so forth. So I don't think I'm not perhaps as uncomfortable on that point as Councillor Davenport-Ray is. However, I think there is a difference between that and actually having a permanent office space for a commercial organisation. That, for me, is a different kettle of fish. And similarly, council offices for the parish council, not quite sure where it sits on that spectrum. I think in terms of percentage of growth, I think we also have to look at absolute numbers. So 35% is probably one of the largest percentages that we'd see across Huntingdonshire. However, it is for a relatively small settlement of just under 2,000 residents, I think. So in absolute numbers, it's, there is a large proportion. However, 2.3 million is also a large proportion of our total SIL pot. And so I think, while we look at percentages and absolute numbers, when we're looking at growth, we also need to look at percentages and absolute numbers in terms of how the investment from our SIL pot reflects that. And it's not obviously a direct correlation, but I think there needs to be some sort of sensitivity to that. And so I think that makes the ask, and particularly with the 88% of the total ask, in that bid, that does sit somewhat uncomfortably with me. And I think there's, again, just reiterating what's already been said, I think there's quite a lot of unknowns in how this project's going to land. And perhaps it is just a little bit too early. I mean, I don't want to necessarily assume that it will have a different result in the future, but certainly that's obviously a possibility. And it feels like there's quite a bit of uncertainty at this point, so it makes it hard to disagree with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. And I think certainly, what I've already heard is, there will be potentially opportunities for people to come back because there will be other SIL rounds. Can I just bring in Mr Gildersleeves before I come back to Councillor Sanderson?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think just to distill some of the questions and the points that members are trying to get to here, I don't think there's any recognition. There's no lack of recognition regarding the growth element. I think the ambition of the project is quite plausible and laudable. And actually, there's something there that I'm sure, in terms of making a community hub facility work, there probably is the bones of a project there. But at this moment in time, I think we have concerns about the deliverability of the project and actually how sustainable it would be longer term, picking up that longer term revenue impact. And when I look at some of the other projects that this council is involved in working with other partners, other bodies to make community assets sustainable in the longer term, we're kind of asking those sorts of questions about this particular project, and we just don't have the evidence and the information before us at this time.
Thank you. And Councillor Sanderson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to take all these comments back to the team, and I do share your disappointment, because I think it's quite, as Mr. Gildersleeve just said, it's a very laudable project. It is a big ask. I think, as Councillor Pitt said, and the absolute numbers for growth are not that high. The percentage, of course, is quite high. So I'm happy to do that. I mean, the implementation team are quite small. They're very efficient, however, and they're hopefully getting a new member of staff quite soon. So I think maybe some work with the parish council here. I know the local members, Steve Corney, particularly, is very proactive. So if going forward we can just see how we can help, particularly with 106, if they're having development at RAF Upwood, for example, we could possibly find a way forward in the future.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. I think we're all on the same sort of page here, and I too would love to see this come forward and be preserved. When I think about Alconbury Weald and the watchtower, the field watchtower there, it might be that the parish council at Bury can talk to Alconbury Weald and see how they managed to keep the watchtower. I don't know whether it was a listed building, but I definitely think there's some sort of working to be done, looking at other projects that have been done and similar. Obviously, the watchtower at Alconbury Weald was used as a cafe, but it was still a community building.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, were you indicating?
I was just going to point out that the watchtower at Alconbury Weald is currently vacant because it wasn't commercially viable, despite the hard work of us at Neat's Business Bohemia. So these things are very difficult, aren't they? And it's an illustration of that.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Wakefield.
Yeah, I agree with the analyses of colleagues from around the table, so won't repeat them. I was just going to touch on the points officers have flagged to us around the lack of evidence of use, even of the existing village hall, and that point around competition, which Mr. Gildersleeve's flagged with respect to sustainability as well, which for me must be a significant point for us here in considering this application. But I share your disappointment, Chair, that it certainly feels like not to prejudge and preempt any future consideration, but it feels like there must be capability for a round that for an application that we would wish to be supporting with respect to the site at some stage. But that's not what's before us.
Thank you very much. And if there are no more comments then on this particular one, can we move to a vote, please? So this is a recommendation to decline the Guardroom Community Hub at Bury. All those in favour to decline, please show. So again, unanimous. Thank you very much, colleagues. In which case then we're going to skip over the fire station. We're going to move on to F, which is the recommendation to decline the sports pavilion at Abbey College, Ramsey. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. A very high percentage ask here, 98%, and obviously in monetary terms, asking for 4.4 million of our SIL budget. So, yes, to improve sports facilities at Abbey College in Ramsey. Again, questions about deliverability of this project. One quote's been provided for this. Again, no other funding requested from other bodies such as the County Council as local education authority. We'd need to look or need to have some evidence of match funding there, I think. Has seen 15% growth in Ramsey, although of course they have another application which we'll consider later that's recommended for approval. Lack of evidence here that it links to growth. No evidence that the County Council support this, although of course it is an academy. No evidence of support from One Leisure, only at the draft estimate stage. No evidence of further funding or support from the Town Council in Ramsey or Bury Parish Council. So I think given, as the summary says, the high percentage of SIL ask, lack of match funding, and lack of supporting evidence, the recommendation here is to decline.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanderson. I've got Councillor Wakeford, then Councillor Taylor.
I think Councillor Sanderson has listed all of the fundamental points, but both a very high still ask percentage-wise and a very high ask in cash terms as well. I think the lack of evidence of support and engagement with other bodies that you would naturally expect to have taken place here, as he's highlighted, is a particular weakness. So this isn't one of the strongest applications before us. I think the officer recommendation is absolutely clear cut. Unfortunately, as much as we would wish to be supporting the quality of sports provisions in all of our schools across the district, so I have no hesitation supporting the officer advice here. Reluctantly, I'm afraid, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of my more concerning thoughts on this is the fact that the project is to replace teaching accommodation, and absolutely I'm all for sport, but there seems to be no correspondence with the local authority, Cambridgeshire County Council, on basic needs. If they were to take away that teaching accommodation, would it leave the area without the needs of the basic needs of our children, and that is something that the LA is responsible for.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
As a school governor elsewhere, I'm not as concerned about the lack of CCC evidence support in this situation. As it's an academy, the County Council would actually expect the Academy to be exploring their own funding options, maybe with a letter of support, and that would be it. But I think on balance, the officer analysis here is correct. The lack of analysis of how this might affect One Leisure Ramsey, which is literally across the playing field from the school, and no information from the Town Council or community support evidenced. I think on balance, the conclusion is correct. But I think academies are in a very difficult position of, because they're an academy not receiving funding from CCC to improve facilities like this, and receiving advice to go out exactly in this way to find funding to improve their facilities.
Councillor Taylor and Councillor Pitt. Sorry, I didn't see which order. So.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just come back on clarity of what I said to Councillor Davenport-Ray. I wasn't I wasn't talking about the funding. My main concern is that the project is to replace teaching accommodation and construct a new 594 metre square sports hall. So we need to know that we have enough space for our children in our schools, whether it's primary, nursery or senior schools. And to say that in this report, I see no correspondence with our local authority who has a statutory duty on basic needs for our children. We must provide school spaces for our children. There is no correspondence with CCC on this.
Thank you for that clarity. Councillor Pitt.
I think it's probably a wider point across this round of SIL. I'm sort of very mindful that the funding round was announced, with relatively little notice. So I have a bit of sympathy for these applicants that, perhaps struggle to get support from other outside bodies and other layers of council. And I think, as we've discussed earlier, we are reviewing the SIL governance and the SIL policy, and I think this will be a key thing to sort of bear in mind, to give applicants plenty of run-up so they've got time to develop proposals with certainty that, the window is going to be open from a certain period to, and so on. Because I think these things do take time, and, so I guess I'm just, with regret, I think the report is correct that we need to see that evidence, and I sympathise with probably all the applicants that they've, had a relatively narrow window to prepare some of these documents. So, yeah, a small consolation perhaps, but I just wanted to flag that up.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt, and I think that echoes the comments we heard from Councillor Sanderson earlier, that the SIL review that we're doing, these are the very issues I know that we've been talking about as part of that work that's been ongoing. So I'm really looking forward to that coming forward. So we have a recommendation before us to decline the sports provision at Abbey College. Can I have a show of hands in support of decline? And again, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we move now to Folksworth, and this is the Folksworth Multi-Use Games Area, or MUGA.
Thank you, Chair. It certainly is. 100% SIL ask here, 96.8k. I do have a little sympathy with a bit of sympathy with smaller parishes here. Obviously, they struggle for growth. As we can see, it's only been 1.8%. 7 net completions in Folksworth and Washingley in that 2011-2023 period. Parish obviously can only contribute a small amount here, £2,000, but that actually wasn't reflected in their application, and they haven't applied for any other match funding. Not an evidence of a link to growth here, not listed in the infrastructure development plan. As I said, no other funding sources applied for, no demonstration that they have been applied for. So the recommendation here is to decline.
Thank you. Does anybody, Councillor Ferguson?
I think our guidance is that that successful applications have to be linked to growth, and this clearly isn't linked to growth as well. I'm also concerned not just this application, but all of the applications that have a really high SIL ask. Obviously, SIL is a limited part of funding, and it goes much further. If we can use it as seed funding for projects, which can be leveraged with other funding sources as well. So, yeah, that's also a reason for declining for me.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to comment on this one? If not, then I will move to the vote. So this one is a recommendation to decline the Folksworth MUGA. Can I have a show in favour of decline? Thank you. That's also unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. That moves us on to Warboys, and this is a new workshop with storage for the Warboys New Parish Centre.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, this is for Warboys, another 100% ask here, £80,000. On the deliverability, no quote has been provided. And it's obviously hard to see, as it says here, if there's any contingency, if there's no quote. Town Council, I again have sympathy, they have no funds available for the project. Well, it doesn't seem to be any indication that they've looked for other funding sources. And so 15% growth, a reasonable amount of growth in Warboys. But again, I think this falls down, and there's a reason for the decline because there isn't a quote and there isn't any link to other sources of funding.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak on this one? Councillor Wakeford?
Just to pick out from the report as highlighted by officers that this is, of course, separate to the Village Hall project, which has received funding previously in SIL rounds, and so the concerns around the strength of the application refer specifically to clearly the application in front of us, which is more limited and not as connected to the necessary factors as the nearby application that has commanded support previously.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? No? In which case then you have a recommendation before you to decline. Can I have a show in favour for declining? Okay, another unanimous decision. Thank you very much. Not to knock the microphone. That moves us on to, we're going to skip over the George V Pavilion in Huntingdon. We're going to come back to that. So that moves us on to the recommendation to decline the funding for an extension to a footpath in Colne.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mentioned this in my opening remarks. And whilst it's a highway safety project and clearly will be of benefit to the people that live in those 6 dwellings, I think the emphasis here is it's highway. It's more of a single local highway improvement scheme that we're probably familiar with as ward members. And I again do have sympathy that the parish council here feel they don't have enough funding just to complete that process. But again, it doesn't show how it unlinks growth. It's obviously to serve existing properties. We also have concerns about deliverability and the cost of the scheme. So not in the infrastructure development plan, not supporting new growth, questions about the land ownership, and some of this may be on private property, and quite a high level of still ask. The percentage ask here is some 68%, and we're being asked to contribute just over £51,000. So again, that's a recommendation of decline.
Thank you. We're obviously not moving sufficiently in part of the room because the lighting has gone into energy saving mode, which is good news for our environment, but apologies for those of you who can't quite see us on screen. Does anybody particularly wish to speak to this one? As we've had quite a good summary already. No? Okay, so in which case then the recommendation before us is to decline the extension to the footpath at Colne. Can I have a show in favour of decline? Thank you. Again, unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on to the next one, which is Ramsey again, but this time it's to approve funding for a community centre extension at Ramsey.
Thank you, Chair. So this, as you say, is 39% still ask, £100,000 for Ramsey Community Centre, including a commercial-sized kitchen. Town Council have been, I think, very proactive on this, and well done to them. They've got alternative sources of funding. They've got some from Cambridgeshire Priorities Capital Fund, Cambridge Acre, various other pots of money. Sorry, my computer's gone wrong there. And there has been a fair amount of growth in Ramsey, as you can see, 15%. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my screen back on. Slight technical problem. And I think given the level of growth in Ramsey and the public benefit here, as it says here, more community rooms will help to facilitate, can't get my words out this evening, a morning nursery in the town. There's an ambition to run courses using the kitchen as well, working with the Ramsey Neighbourhood Trust. The concern about delivering the project, there's no detailed breakdown of the quote, so we're not sure of the quite sure of the contingency within that quote. And the recommendation is one of approval, but that's subject to confirmation of full funding being in place.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this particular item? Councillor Wakeford.
Got there in the end. Simply to say, Chair, I completely agree with Councillor Sanderson that this is a strong application. I think I'm very pleased to be able to support it. The opposite recommendation is really clearly evident. So no, I'm quite content with us moving to a swift decision on this one.
Thank you. And I think sometimes where it is so clear in the report from the detailed work of the officers, it does make it much easier to take that and move forward. So there are no other comments on that one. So this is a recommendation to approve funding for the community centre extension at Ramsey. So all those in favour of an approval, please show. Okay, again, that's unanimous. Thank you. So that takes us on to MAGPAS, and this is an internal refit and purchase of an aviation tank.
Thank you, Chair. You'll recall that MAGPAS did submit an application previously, which was approved. I think it was for about £700,000. I think we're all familiar with the fine work that MAGPAS do. But I think it's perhaps a little bit difficult to see how this one would fit in. Again, no specific quote, so no contingency information. Some questions as well about the cost of the project. And this is for £200,000. Yeah, again, I think unclear supporting evidence. Internal fittings haven't been specified. No evidence that will link to the growth. Yeah, I do have sympathy with MAGPAS. I do know them pretty well. But they have been supported before, and we want to see them succeed, but I think on this occasion it's a recommendation for decline.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Does anybody have any comments on this one? No, okay. I was going to say, like Councillor Sanderson, I know they do good work right across the county and in fact beyond, but the recommendation from officers is fairly clear. So I'm going to move to a vote then. The recommendation from officers is to decline the funding for MAGPAS internal refit and the purchase of an aviation tank. All those in favour of decline? Okay, thank you very much. That's unanimous. So we're moving on now to the two items that we skipped over just so that we could retain colleagues in the room for as long as possible before we asked anybody to depart. So we're going to ask Councillor Taylor, excuse me, if she would depart so that we can talk through the fire station application that she has already declared an interest in. Councillor Taylor, we will come and retrieve you for the final item. Please don't let me leave her outside for very long. So this is the item which is, let me just go back. This is item E for those of you who are following us online. This is the recommendation to decline funding for the St Neots Community Fire Station Modernisation and Extension Project.
Thank you, Chair. So we're asking for 38% of the contribution here, but that's a total cost of 1.845 million, so that's £700,000. Obviously, the fire station built in 1960, so very dated. Again, not supporting evidence of public benefit. I can see that would create some more space available for the town, but again, it's hard to see how that would link in perhaps to the wider community. So the project behind the sale application doesn't have planning permission. Again, obviously, as we know, reasonably high growth in St Neots, 12%, but obviously a very high population there. So some almost 1,700 completions in that key period between 2011 and 2023, including Loves Farm 1. Again, insufficient evidence of links to growth. And the need to have a bigger gym and community space, excludes items such as furniture, IT, gym equipment, etc. Doesn't appear to be any support from the town council, no funding support or asked for from the town council there. So given the relative high level of SIL ask, and that lack of supporting evidence, and the unclear project costs, the recommendation here is to decline.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. It's always a bit disappointing when there are things that you kind of intuitively think could be good, but you don't have the evidence in front of you with which to make those decisions. Councillor Pitt.
Sorry, just because there's a reference to the town council, although I think I might actually just leave the room for just to avoidance of any risk.
Thank you. I think that's probably wise. I was going to say, we had already taken advice, but I think on the basis that that makes people feel comfortable given the links. Councillor Davenport-Ray?
The first time I read through this section, I was really surprised about the officer conclusions around growth, because it references Loves Farm 1 and the amount of growth that's already happened there and will happen around there. And so that this wasn't necessarily linked with a need that has been created because of more growth. But on reading more closely into what they've described here, it looks like when the last infrastructure delivery strategy was written, the fire authority was consulted, and their conclusion was that actually that as house building increases, fire calls tend to decline as population rises. That was totally counterintuitive to me, but they are the experts. And so with that detail, I think I probably do understand the officer conclusion here that there isn't the evidence to support using SIL in this particular instance.
Councillor Wakeford?
Just in case, I'm sure our rapt online audience aren't necessarily cross-checking against the detail of the report, given that we've skipped around. Is it worth just to adding on Councillor Davenport-Ray's comments, because absolutely it was counterintuitive to me as well, but the specific explanation that we're offered here, recapping the fire service view, is the reason as you build more houses, fire calls reduce, is because the newer houses are built to newer building regulations, newer fire safety, and so on. And forgive me if that's wildly obvious to all of our online viewers, but it was a useful clarification for me in understanding the position there. But similarly, I think the officer analysis is well evidenced, and I'm content to take the recommendation before us, Chair.
Are there any other comments, or Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, obviously it's difficult to turn down fire stations and air ambulance improvements as well, but I think it's a lot of money, and I would have hoped to have seen a better application for that amount of money as well. The comments like more community space available in the town have to be supported, because I think there is a large amount of community space in St Neots. Not all of it is very well utilised, and so I think, I would have hoped to have seen more evidence in this application, and so I'm happy with the conclusion to decline it on this occasion.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. If there are no more comments, then the recommendation before us for this item is, I've just got to find it visually on the paper before me. So this is a recommendation to decline funding for the St Neots Community Fire Station Modernisation and Extension Project. All those in favour of decline, please show. Unanimous by those of us who are left in the room. Thank you very much. At which point then we're going to ask Councillor Sanderson to depart and send Councillor Taylor and Councillor Pitt please back into the room for the final item. We promise to come and retrieve you, Councillor Sanderson, when we've concluded this item. Sorry, and Councillor Wakeford, thank you. We will invite you to depart as well. Please don't go far. So, colleagues, we have before us the final item then to make a decision on this evening for SIL. This is the King George V Pavilion Works at Huntingdon. Obviously, we've lost Councillor Sanderson to introduce it. I'm happy to cover that as chair, but Mr. Gildersleeves, if you want to chip in, please do. So if I just cover it broadly as chair, this is another one, and I will make a personal comment here. This is another one that I was somewhat disappointed to see the officer recommendation of decline. This is an item that has been backwards and forwards over a number of SIL rounds, and it was originally an application for approve many years ago when it first came through under the previous administration. However, looking at the evidence that has been provided, the recommendations from officers is clear that there isn't sufficient evidence that will back up the argument as to why this is the right application at this time with the right level of aspiration. I know this one will be one that people will be watching with great intent. Mr. Gildersleeves, was there anything else you wish to raise? So I'm happy to take comments from around the room. I will just also mention that this is also one that has appeared in our sports strategy, although that wasn't referenced by the applicant. And again, there are things here where we have been involved, I think, over a number of years, but the application doesn't reference an awful lot of that evidence that I would have hoped might have been in this application. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
I'll ask a question of Mr. Gildersleeves. So, Chair, you've mentioned our newly adopted sports playing pitch strategy. I just wanted to ask if officers had taken that into account when they made their conclusion in their report.
Yep. So through yourself, Chair, to answer that question, yes, we are aware of that strategy and will have taken that into consideration as we have the local plan, the corporate plan, the place strategy, et cetera, et cetera. I think what I would just flag on this one is this is the second application on this one. And, I think we as officers are committed to taking this away after this and kind of feeding back the comments and seeing where we can offer some further support to this moving forward, given that there is some alignment with what's in that playing pitch strategy.
Thank you very much. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start with the fact that this is, it's not criticism, it's constructive, as they say, criticism, but it's not criticism. So within the report, the summary, as Councillor Davenport-Ray has just spoken about, HDC sports strategy overall states there are enough facilities in the district, and we're talking about cricket pitches. The focus within the strategy is more on the upkeeping of pitches, so to keep them in good shape, which this proposal does not address, nor does it provide additional indoor facilities. That's what it states in our report. I would like to add as well, after reading the playing pitch and outdoor sports strategy assessment report, although it does state in there are enough facilities in the district, what I want to pick up on is the links with participation uptake. So within softball cricket, this is aimed at women and girls. Certainly within the report, in our playing pitch strategy report, it states that there are only 2 ladies team in the whole of the district, which is actually quite disappointing. But I'll go on. Dynamic, there is a cricket name of, it's called Dynamo Cricket. This is aimed at 8 to 11-year-olds, and All Stars is aimed to introduce cricket to children from 5 to 8. If these groups were introduced, then participation rates would increase, and there would be need for more cricket facilities. See what I'm getting at here? So, also within the sports strategy, so it's part of the assessment report, Huntingdon District Cricket Club aspires to add a senior Saturday team, men's and senior women's, which is great. The club currently has 2 senior Saturday teams, and therefore, if it adds another team on a Saturday, it would have to find an alternative home ground for this team. So, I have made so many notes, I don't know where they are. So what I'm trying to get at is, as this application stands, it would not address the club wanting to expand, and it provides no extra cricket pitches for training and tournaments or indoor cricket nets. So, what I'm trying to say is, if we could take this, and as we've said, back and address all this, look at the sports strategy and the assessment need, this would be really, really helpful to try and get this to the place that actually the cricket club might need it to be, and it would probably work.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. And, I think what it shows is just how much we do pore over all of these applications in great detail and have quite a lot of angst over the decisions that we have to make on behalf of the applicants. Councillor Davenport-Ray, I noticed you'd signal.
I think for a town council to come back, what I think this is the 3rd time with an application, shows how important they take this project and how much they would like it to succeed. So it sort of hurts my heart to see the officer recommendation of decline, but I do think it is compelling. And to me, the most compelling part is the lack of a quote, and our role as being robust and using public funding to support projects over which we feel we have significant trust, I suppose, as public officers. And it would make me uncomfortable to support something of this scale where there's so many unknowns still available. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to comment? Councillor Pitts?
Just very quickly, I think perhaps I'd like to think, perhaps it's the best way to express it, that this application is still a work in progress, and there's clearly things that our officers are hoping to see. So evidence of community support, the quote as Councillor Davenport-Ray mentions, and then the evidence of continued and so current usage and improved usage. And fundamentally, a good idea is great, but we need to see that business case behind it to show that it's a good idea that's actually going to deliver material benefits. And I'd like to think that is possible, and I really would encourage the applicant to have another crack at it and see if with support from our officers we can get this one right. If it is the project that needs to happen, let's make sure it does.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt, and you've just said everything I probably would have said in summing up, so thank you very much for that. In which case, then we have a recommendation before us to decline the George V Cricket Pavilion in Huntingdon. Can I have a show of hands for those in favour to decline? Thank you very much. That's a decline. In which case, can we please retrieve Councillor Sanderson from the lobby? Thank you very much, Mr. Morley.
Councillor Wakefield.
Oh, and Councillor Wakeford. Yes, please don't leave him out there either. Thank you very much, colleagues, because that was a very long item and very detailed, but I'm very pleased that we've given it that amount of time. I will just wait for colleagues to come back in the room before just concluding. Welcome back. We've finished our business. I was just thanking people for their perseverance, but also to thank colleagues for the hard work you've done. I know that a lot of us have had a lot of discussion over this and a lot of angst. I think it would be fair to say, I think we were all hoping in this round, Councillor Sanderson's portfolio holder, I think we were all hoping in this round that we would have more that were ready for approval. But I'm very much looking forward to that new SIL governance coming through the process, coming through council. And I think that will, I hope, help us move forward. In which case then, I'm going to move us to the next part of the agenda. Bear with me for a moment, because I believe, I've just got to go back up to the top, but this is the part at which I need to, I've got one more item before I exclude the press and the public. So this next item, item 7, is the Local Government Association Governance Peer Challenge Feedback Report, which was to follow and which has been circulated. This is an item that I will present, but I will present very briefly because you've had a copy of the report. So the Local Government Association came at our invitation to look at to undertake for us an audit peer challenge in March. We have been proactive in working with the Local Government Association, and this is the first of a number of opportunities to look at our practice and to seek to learn and to develop the work that we do so that we have the best and optimal impact. I'm going to sort of at this point, before I get into the detail, ask Mrs. Sutton, did you want to come to the table on the Local Government Association peer review to speak to it? Sorry, I can't remember whether we were expecting you to the table or not, and I haven't invited you. If you don't wish to, that's fine. No, that's fine, in which case I shall continue. Sorry, I suddenly had a moment where I looked across and thought perhaps I should have invited you. Thank you very much. So the peer review team came in. They came to visit us for a day, and they were following up from a peer review that had happened some 6 months earlier. On the back of a very full process working with them, where they spoke to a number of staff, they spoke to a number of members, they have gathered their views and their thoughts, looked at the evidence, and they have made some recommendations to us of work that they think that we ought to be taking forward. And they fall under 5 recommendations. So the first are concentrating on the progress that we've made against the initial recommendations from 6 months ago. And then there are a remaining 4 that are new recommendations that they think will have a benefit to us as an organisation in terms of our wider governance. So the report sets out those recommendations. This has not yet, because of the nature of this report, it is coming to Cabinet. It has not gone yet anywhere else in the organisation. So it is coming to Cabinet so that you have the opportunity to see it and to engage with it. It's a reminder that the recommendations are that Council receive this report, so that you are happy that that's where it will go next, to note the recommendations, and then to note Appendix 2, which provides an update on the progress against all of the proposed recommendations. So that's what's before us, is that you will, I hope, be in a position that you are happy to make the recommendation that it goes to Council. But before we do that, are there any comments or questions on the report? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Could I ask Mrs. Sutton a question?
You can, and apologies, Mrs. Sutton, she's coming to the table.
Appendix 2 outlines not just the 5 new actions, but the 17 actions that arose last March. And I noticed of the 17, there are 10 which are scheduled to be completed by next month. So I wanted to ask whether you feel like you have the resources and the plan in place in order to achieve that. Seems like a very tall ask. All 10 of them achieved by next month.
We will aim to complete as many of the actions as we can, but there will be at least one action, which is the external review of the internal audit service, which we will not be able to complete in time. However, we have contracted with BDO, who are our external auditors for the ICT audits, to conduct an internal assessment of where we are so that we have a basis for moving forward on the external one.
Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Pitt.
So, as a cabinet member that's been relatively not as close to this as some of my colleagues, reading the report again, fresh in running up to this meeting, I mean, some of it's a little bit uncomfortable to read, but actually, I really welcome some of the robustness of the challenge, and I think it reflects the conversations that I've had amongst senior leadership and cabinet colleagues that we take this really seriously. I think there's been a really good dialogue building up to this report, and I really welcome the process in order to, make sure our council keeps improving for the benefit, the reasons why we're all here to benefit our residents. So while some of it is, a little bit hard to read, I think I really welcome what's in it, and good to see the progress is, moving forwards.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. I think it would be fair to say that, yes, sometimes it is uncomfortable to read, but actually we never make progress unless we have an honest and hard look at what we do well, what we could do better, and where there's room for new things that perhaps we haven't done. And actually, I think I'd be more worried if I ever got a report that said, it's absolutely fantastic, there's nothing else left to do, because actually I think there will always be something to do. There will always be something that we can improve upon, and that's the benefit of working with our peers. They come from our councils around the country. We, in fact, our chief executive is involved in a peer review as we speak somewhere else in the country. We learn by that, and that brings great strength to us as an organisation. So yes, whilst there are some things in there, I would like to say, actually, there are some things which are uncomfortable, but it's more uncomfortable if we don't do something with them. And that's the commitment I've heard from our professional team. The answer is, we are working hard to make sure that we're going to deliver against all of these. Some things may not be completed, but they will at least be in progress. Councillor Ferguson.
So having recently inherited this portfolio as a commitment you hear from me as well. So the whole process of having somebody look at your service is always uncomfortable, but I completely support all the recommendations here, and I think they will help us to be a more risk aware and a better governed council going forward. The report also recognises, of course, that we're on a cultural journey. It sounds like an excuse, but we've only been here for 2 years, and we started from scratch. And in that time, we've had to appoint a new managing director. And so there's a cultural change going on. But I'm fairly confident, or extremely confident, that if we meet if we fulfil all these recommendations, fulfill all the previous recommendations, we'll be on a journey to being the council that we want to be as well. And I think the key recommendations for me is that we need to beef up our audit and risk capacity as well, which are fair recommendations. But also we need to invest more in our corporate governance committee and give them the strength. There was an excellent speech from opposition member Councillor Hodgson-Jones at last full council, talking about the role of corporate governance and overview and scrutiny in making the administration better. And I completely support his words. And I think this is a key way of achieving that.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. I suppose for avoidance of doubt for external observers, the reference to starting from scratch there from Councillor Ferguson, there was a bit of a council here before we started 2 years ago. But I think with respect to the audit actions, and there's a lot here that has a significant background. So I think that is what I took to be the gist of the suggestion there, that there was a significant way to go. is fair. I think there is a huge amount in here that really merits unpicking in detail. I hope I'm not surprising any of our many viewers tonight in saying that this is clearly not the first time that we have talked about governance issues as a cabinet. This is the formal reception of the report into a public space, but as I think the public would expect, we are engaged with this in some level of detail. So you've made the point in with respect to other items already this evening. I think, Chair, around the amount of time spent on an item not necessarily being proportional, the length of discussion not necessarily being proportional to the weight it deserves. I think this is absolutely true on this one, because otherwise we really would be here all night. Like Councillor Ferguson, I think the recommendations are extremely helpful. Like Councillor Pitt, I think the tone is reassuring, because, as you rightly said, Chair, being told there's nothing to see anywhere would be not plausible and not reassuring at all. So I'm happy to note this, and also confident that there is much work underway as represented by the report, but more than we have scope to give visibility to in detail in our debate here this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Councillor Davenport-Ray?
Yes, I just wanted to put on record my thanks to Mrs. Sutton for her professionalism and endurance in this process, because we know how many other things she's working on at the same time that aren't just important, but are legally required of us as a council. So for this happening at the same time, I would say well done to both her and her team.
Thank you. Absolutely, I'd endorse that. Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, I just want to highlight, Chair, that the corporate governance is meeting an extraordinary meeting on the 18th. So things are moving, and I do believe they're going to be discussing terms of reference. So things are clearly moving.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Sutton?
No, I'm not there. Thank you. Just to respond to Councillor Taylor's point, we had a subgroup meeting who have reviewed the terms of reference, and there are recommended terms of reference going to Thursday's meeting, as pointed out. And that was a really collaborative effort across the committee. And I think we have good terms of reference now to propose to them.
Thank you, and I think that was also cross-party, isn't it? So this is a cross-council, cross-party endeavour, and this is about improved governance. And I think I'm right in saying that we hadn't had a peer review for quite some time as an organisation, and we've had two in a relatively short space of time. And in fact, in May we'll have a third. I think that signals our commitment to continuous improvement, but actually there is also a commitment to finding the resources that we know that we will need in order to reach the level that we aspire to and believe we should be attaining. So I think that what I want to communicate is that whilst this has identified opportunities for improvement and strengthening, actually behind it is also the commitment with the resourcing to actually make this the reality. So a really important report. I look forward to this going through due process. I had in fact read the wrong set of recommendations to you. I'd got a bit carried away, and I'd read to you the recommendations for the Corporate Governance Committee. So I shall just retract those. If you are happy, I'll make the recommendations for the correct version for this Cabinet, if that's okay with you. So this Cabinet is recommended to receive the report in Appendix 1 and to note its recommendations, and then to note Appendix 2, which provides an update on progress against all of the proposed recommendations. So if you're content to do that and to receive the report and to note the recommendations, we will move on. Mrs. Sutton, please would you thank all of the staff involved. It does take a lot of work and commitment, but actually probably the bigger part is the work ahead of us, and we're really grateful for everybody's commitment and support in moving forward. So thank you very much. In which case then, that moves us on to the part of the evening where I politely invite our audience to make a departure very shortly. I'm going to read the formal statement because I'm required to do so. So we are about to move into the private part of the meeting because there may be items which are confidential, but let me read the statement. So item 8 is exclusion of the press and public. To resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting because the business to be transacted contains information pertaining to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. So at that point, those that are now going to depart, and particularly to those of you who are online, I'll say good night to you. We will conclude our remaining 2 items, but we will no longer be broadcasting. Thank you very much.